is back? Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Spectator Sports, where we cover sports from a spectator's point of view. I'm your host Sebastian Fonseca, and this is episode number 133. In this episode, we're going to be breaking down all the major topics surrounding the Week 1 action in the NFL. But before we get into the content, please do us a massive favor. We are on the grind to 400 subscribers by the end of the calendar year, so it would mean a massive difference if you could help us out by dropping a like on this video and subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. If you want to get clips from this week's episode of Spectator Sports, we got that for you here on YouTube in our various playlists, as well as on TikTok. And if you want to enjoy Spectator Sports from an audio-only experience, we got that for you on Spotify. I'll link everything in the description, and let's get into this week's episode. The season opener brought its twists and turns, and it started off with an unfortunate start with the injury of Ben VanSumeren. He tore his patellar tendon on the game's opening kickoff, and this is already coming off the heels of him tearing his ACL that prematurely ended his season last year. And I feel gutted for Ben VanSumeren, to be honest, because he went from a depth linebacker to being used as a fullback, as the Eagles were kind of experimenting with that last year, and for him now to be out for the entire season is just truly gut-wrenching. So obviously I wish Ben a speedy recovery, and I hope he comes back stronger than ever. Now, the other part of this was that Jalen Carter was ejected for spitting on Dak Prescott prior to the game's first snap. Now, to break this all down, it appears that Dak Prescott and Jalen Carter got into it a little bit, where each was talking trash. Dak was kind of standing behind his two rather large offensive linemen, talking some trash, spat in the direction of the Eagles' defensive huddle, where Jalen saw, and proceeded to then engage in Dak, where later he would spit on Dak's chest. The ref saw that and immediately ejected Jalen Carter before he even plays a single snap in 2025. Credit to the refs, they de-escalated that situation. I think the ejection was warranted, and Jalen just has to be better. He knows that he is the Eagles' defensive anchor, and Vic Fangio makes his entire defensive game plan around him and his availability. The amount of preparation the Cowboys probably put into in terms of blocking schemes and trying to minimize as much damage that Jalen Carter could possibly do was out the window, and this gave the Cowboys new life. I really anticipated that with Jalen Carter there, it would have been a pretty nasty day, as the Cowboys' offensive line isn't quite the same as what it used to be in past seasons, and they do have some younger players on that offensive line. Now, post-game, Jalen Carter did take accountability, which I do appreciate. At this point in time, he has developed quite a bit of a reputation. He's had off-the-field issues heading into the NFL draft. It sort of tanked his draft stock, and now with this, and I'm sure with no tolerance, with taunting being really emphasized this year, and with a lot of the celebrations being cut down with an emphasis on sportsmanship, I wouldn't be surprised that a suspension would loom likely. With Jalen Carter back in the Eagles locker room, Dallas drove right down the field with little to no resistance, as the Eagles defense was struggling to get any type of heat on Dak Prescott. The Dallas offense was very successful in the first half, as they scored on every drive, scoring touchdowns on their first two possessions and followed that up with 2 field goals to close the half. My concerns over the second cornerback spot became a reality as Adoree Jackson was getting torched. He allowed 5 catches for over 100 yards, and then also included a defensive pass interference penalty. And most of this damage came against CeeDee Lamb or George Pickens, but one thing to note was that on each of the Cowboys' scoring drives, it was aided by penalty. Some of them were poorly timed, undisciplined defensive fouls, like a defensive PI on Adoree Jackson in the end zone that led to a Javonte Williams touchdown. That's fair. But a lot of these other calls were ticky-tack, and it also seemed that for whatever reason, there was a really tight leash on what was deemed taunting or unsportsmanlike conduct, as the Eagles racked up 9 penalties for over 100 yards. Now, despite the Eagles giving up scoring drives, the offense was able to answer the call. Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley Each provided a spark with the running game, with Jalen capping off the first 2 touchdown drives himself using his legs. And he did a really good job of buying time in the pocket until he found a crease to get into the end zone. And after the defense finally got a stop and held the Cowboys to 3 points, the Eagles executed a 2-minute offense to perfection, where they ended up taking their first lead of the game with a powerful Saquon Barkley run from 10 yards out, as they took a 21-20 lead heading into halftime. After a fast-paced first half between these two NFC East rivals, where they combined to score 40 points, I figured that the over of 47.5 was a slam dunk as long as a team scored a touchdown. But that touchdown didn't happen in the second half. After the Eagles kicked a 58-yard field goal on their opening drive of the second half, scoring points and moving the football became extremely difficult. The defenses tightened up their defensive intensity. Dallas tried to counter after a long Miles Sanders run to get them into the red zone, but 3 plays later and after a controversial defensive penalty on the Eagles, Sanders would go on to fumble, denying the Cowboys any chance of points. After play was suspended for over an hour due to lightning in the South Philly area, the defense would continue to dominate once play resumed. The Eagles had a couple of long drives that at least chewed up some time off the clock, and Dallas had one last chance to take the lead. CD, who did have a really good night, finishing with 7 catches for 110 yards. He did have a few drops, and the final one was devastating, as Dak did buy some time against the Eagles pass rush as he lofted a deep ball towards the 30-yard line, but CD just could not haul it in, and the Eagles were back on offense, needing a first down to end the game. On 3rd and short, Jalen audibled and motioned Saquon Barkley out wide, allowing the Cowboys defense to get spread out, leaving Jalen with a running lane to ice the game. I gotta say that this was a lot closer than I expected. After Carter's ejection to start off the game, the Eagles defense was off kilter, but thanks to Fangio's second half adjustments, it seemed that the defense really dialed it up a few notches as they pitched a second half shutout. And this is all without their superstar defensive tackle in the middle. Rookie Jahad Campbell had a sensational debut, showcasing his incredible athleticism to break up a deep route up the seam, going stride for stride with a tight end, and then later forcing a fumble in the red zone just when Dallas got a fresh set of downs. It seems that Jahad Campbell and Zach Bond are in line to be the best linebacking duo in the NFL. I already talked about Jahad Campbell, but to really highlight with Zach Bond, he was once again stellar on Thursday night. As Miles Sanders was streaking towards the end zone, Zach Bond clocked in at 20.68 miles an hour to track down Miles Sanders on a touchdown-saving tackle. And we all know what happens later, as Jahad was able to force that fumble and wipe out any chance of Dallas getting points. I also got to credit the defensive line after they had to adjust on the fly with the ejection of Jalen Carter. Jordan Davis played 1 snap short of a career high of 53 snaps, and I gotta say he was really good, playing extended playing time compared to what he's used to, especially in being the first game of the NFL season. And honestly, if he was able to finish a sack on Dak Prescott, I would think he would have had a perfect night. Josh Uche, I think, was also a menace defensively, as he was graded the highest rated edge rusher in week 1. And right now, I really want to reserve any concerns I have with this defense once I do see him at full strength. It very well could happen next week against the Chiefs, but until I see Jalen Carter back in the lineup, I will reserve my judgment on this Eagles defense. But I do think after a shaky first half that they did do a good job in holding it down defensively. The Eagles offense, I thought, did a really good job of moving the ball effectively between the 20s, dominating time of possession. But I do wonder why it got so conservative, as we didn't see much of A.J. Brown until the final minute of the game. Once again, Jalen Hurts, despite not filling up the stat sheet, was excellent. I thought he was really decisive of when to throw it and when to tuck it in and take off, protecting himself in the process by sliding early. Jalen made all the right reads and was arguably the best player on the field Thursday night. Seeing how Kansas City struggled to stick with the LA Chargers pass catches, I would really like to see a little bit more aggression from Kevin Patullo, with his only true deep shot being a perfectly executed bomb to Jahan Dotson. Dallas definitely seemed better than initially advertised, despite the recent trade of Micah Parsons to Green Bay. Brian Schottenheimer, I think, did a really good job, as I didn't think he seemed overwhelmed in the moment, and I thought the game plan was really well executed, especially when targeting the weaker cornerback on the Eagles and also steering clear of Quinion Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. Dak, I thought, was very sharp, especially in the first half when targeting CeeDee Lamb, but I didn't think George Pickens made too much of an impact on Thursday, as his loudest play was an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty. Next week, the Dallas Cowboys will be home to face the New York Giants in a divisional matchup for the second week in a row, and the Eagles will be heading to Arrowhead in a Super Bowl rematch against the Kansas City Chiefs. We learned a lot from this year's Sao Paulo game between the Kansas City Chiefs and the LA Chargers. After getting swept the last 3 seasons, the Chargers exercised their divisional demon and beat the Kansas City Chiefs. In year 2 of the Jim Harbaugh era, it got off to an emphatic start as the Chargers were able to open up their run-first offense and uncork their budding superstar quarterback. After 2 quiet seasons, Justin Herbert seems ready to continue his superstar trajectory. After bursting onto the scene in 2020, going toe-to-toe in numerous matchups with Patrick Mahomes, but failing to beat him in all of one of his matchups, which dates back to 2021. On Friday, Herbert was aggressive with an aerial assault on the Chiefs' defense as he diced up Spags' unit for 318 passing yards with 3 touchdowns, as the Chargers were able to pile up nearly 400 yards of total offense, which might have been the best game of Herbert's career. Justin Herbert was nearly flawless against the blitz, as he found Quentin Johnson for the game's opening score. In the second half, the Chiefs got more desperate as Spags sent the house yet again. That wasn't enough to dispel the Chargers' offensive onslaught, as each time Spags sent the blitz, the Chargers were able to navigate and counter with something positive. On the game's most pivotal play late in the fourth quarter, Spags was smelling blood in the water, as the previous play resulted in a Drew Tranquill sack on Justin Herbert, setting up a 3rd and 14. The Chiefs needed a stop to get the ball back and maybe have a chance at winning this game. But once again, on 3rd and long, Spags sent the house, but Chris Jones failed to seal the edge as Herbert was able to get around the former All-Pro defensive tackle and slide for the first down to ice the game. Once again, I want to say that this might have been the best game of Herbert's career. The stakes were high, especially against this particular opponent, and also having several months to fester over that disappointing playoff loss to the Houston Texans last year in the wild card round. Herbert really did a great job in taking command of this offense, as he had Steve Spagnuolo scratching his head all night long. It seems that Harbaugh's vision with the Chargers is slowly coming together. Last year he was focused on the run, but in this game the discipline and the organization appeared very evident, as the Chargers were on point, locked in, and sharp compared to their sloppy play under Brandon Staley. All those Chargers or charging thoughts came into mind when the Chiefs were mounting a comeback in the second half, as they cut the deficit at one point as large as 10 points to just a single point. But instead of collapsing and coming undone in years past, on Friday the Chargers held their nerve. Play calling by Greg Roman was on point, with the Chargers fending off every Chiefs comeback effort, as this seems to be a sign that the culture that Jim Harbaugh is bringing to the franchise is top to bottom. Switching it to the Chiefs, it's becoming more and more evident that Patrick Mahomes can no longer cover up the glaring flaws on the Chiefs roster. Dating back to 2023, thanks to the superstars' heroics, the Chiefs were able to win 17 straight one-possession games, but on Friday that streak was snapped. The offense looked sluggish for much of the first half, mostly thanks to Xavier Worthy's exit after a collision with Travis Kelce. We spoke about the pass catcher cupboard looking bare, especially with Rashee Rice's suspension for the first 6 games of the season, but without Xavier Worthy, the speed element of this offense was down to Hollywood Brown, who did perform pretty well considering the circumstances, but had a crucial drop on a third down in the first half that brought a promising drive to an abrupt end. And despite Hollywood Brown finishing with 99 yards receiving, 47 of those yards came on one last gas heave by Patrick Mahomes, with Khalil Mack barreling down on him. The other two plays that gained more than 30 yards was a Patrick Mahomes dime to Thornton hitting him for a 38-yard gain, and a Travis Kelce touchdown to bring the Chiefs within 2 points. The offensive line was fairly shaky and provided no running lanes for their backs, as Mahomes was the leading rusher on Friday. This offense looked completely stale in the first half, once again finishing without a single touchdown. This time the turnovers weren't there like we saw in the Super Bowl, but once again I want to say that the offense lacked sizzle. Mahomes tried to put the cape on and be Superman once again, running over dudes in the process and even taking it in himself to tie the score. But thanks to Harrison Butker's missed extra point, the Chiefs remained down by 1. This was part of a really sloppy night where the Chiefs accumulated 10 penalties, with 4 of them coming from offensive tackle Jawan Taylor, where he accounted for 2 holding calls and 2 full starts. And this just doesn't feel like an Andy Reid coach team. The defense seemed discombobulated with the Chiefs receivers as they were running open throughout the entire night, and really didn't seem that there was a lot of heat on Justin Herbert despite the absence of Rashawn Slater, who will be missing the entire season due to a season-ending injury. And it got so bad that Spags called blitzes that ended up proving to be futile. I also saw defensive backs colliding with each other in the field of play, as one of them led to one of Quentin Johnson's touchdowns. And you could even see some bickering between Drew Tranquill and Chris Jones after the latter failed to contain the edge, leading to Herbert's game-ending scramble. Mind you, the Chiefs have been a dynasty. The Chiefs are a team that made the Super Bowl 5 out of the last 6 seasons, with their earliest playoff exit being the AFC Championship game in 2021. That's a lot of tread on these players that have frankly gone through a lot of long seasons, and I'm sure that the wear and tear is starting to show itself. Even Mahomes can't do it all, and after several years of the division providing little resistance, this might be the year that the AFC West might finally be catching up with the Kansas City Chiefs. The new-look Green Bay Packers have made a huge statement on a Sunday afternoon clash with the Detroit Lions. The newly acquired Micah Parsons and the Green Bay Packers defense shut down a very high-flying Lions offense that led the league in points last season. They were dominating so much that the Lions didn't even reach the end zone until a garbage time touchdown in the final minute of the game. Despite Micah Parsons dealing with a back injury heading into this Week 1 matchup against the Lions, Micah dominated Penei Sewell. He bull rushed Sewell, which disrupted a Jared Goff throw that resulted in an interception in the red zone. And with the Lions focusing so much of their efforts on Parsons, this allowed other Packers pass rushers to feast, as Rashawn Gary was the main beneficiary as he got home 1.5 times. And again, this was all thanks to Micah's presence in the defensive line. The Packers defense as a whole had 9 tackles for loss on Sunday afternoon. And don't worry, Micah ended up getting in on the fun as well, sacking Jared Goff in the second half to bring another Lions drive to an end. Under defensive coordinator Jeff Hafley, Parsons could flourish in this Packers defense, being deployed in various situations to harass opposing offenses. Jordan Love was solid in his season debut as he passed for a pair of touchdowns on an afternoon where he diced up Calvin Shepard's defense. After dropping 3 straight matchups at home against the Lions, it seems that the Packers have fired a warning shot to reclaim the NFC North for the first time since 2021 with this dominating Week 1 win. I know it's early, but I'm already worried about the Detroit Lions. With 3 new offensive linemen and 2 new coordinators, this version of the Lions didn't seem anywhere near the offensive powerhouse that they were in the last 2 seasons, especially when Ben Johnson was calling plays. In John Morton's debut, Detroit was abysmal offensively. They were held out of the end zone until the final minute of the game, and they were limited to under 200 yards into the final 3 minutes of this game. The Lions had 4 trips to the red zone, only scoring a touchdown on one of them when the game was all but decided. The other 3 drives resulted in 2 field goals and an interception. As I mentioned earlier, Micah Parsons dominated Penei Sewell as he had little to no answers to Micah's vast array of pass rushing moves. This led to Jahmyr Gibbs getting bottled up for 50 yards on 19 touches and Jared Goff under duress all afternoon. The last 2 years, Detroit's offensive line made its mark. They were the ones pushing around opposing defenses, and on Sunday, that script was flipped. The high-flying, explosive offense under Ben Johnson was nowhere to be found. On Sunday, it was stale and lethargic without any sense of aggression. Outside of a deep shot to Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jared Goff wouldn't attempt a single pass traveling over 20-plus air yards until the game was out of reach. After a terrible performance like this, it raises concerns about Jared Goff and the offense. Can he run a top-flight offense without an elite OC? As we've seen him have success under Sean McVay and Ben Johnson, but not before or after. And this question will loom over the Lions throughout the entire season, as Dan Campbell's team will have to regroup, as even the defense got carved up by Jordan Love and eventually gave way to Josh Jacobs, effectively ending the game with a rushing touchdown early in the fourth quarter. Without Ben Johnson, this version of the Detroit Lions looks very tame and frankly pretty soft. Is it time to panic in Miami? Because the Dolphins had the worst showing in week 1's action. With an ugly 33-8 blowout loss against Daniel Jones and the Indianapolis Colts, alarm bells should be ringing that the vibes are bad in South Beach. 2 years ago, the team essentially ostracized Vic Fangio for coaching too hard, as they didn't seem to get along with one another, and it led to Vic's exit at the end of the 2023 season. Fast forward to 2025, Fangio leads the Eagles defense to completely shut down Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl, and the Dolphins open up getting carved up by Daniel Jones for 33 points. Like, are you kidding me here? This secondary might be in for a very long season, because Daniel Jones should be the least of their worries in terms of opposing quarterbacks on their schedule this year. Defense was a huge factor as to why the Dolphins were outgained by over 200 yards on Sunday. Tua Tagovailoa was downright putrid, throwing 2 picks and losing a fumble. He looked particularly lost against Lou Adaromo's defense, rushing throws and putting the ball in harm's way all afternoon. Xavier Howard was a longtime Dolphin and former teammate of Tua in Miami. He definitely gave his DC the inside scoop on Tua's cadences and weaknesses in his game, saying that when you take away Tua's first read, he begins to panic. When asked about his turnovers post-game, about when he turns the ball over, it comes in bunches, Tua got very defensive and followed that up with additional remarks throughout the week, going back and forth with Miami sports media in press conferences leading up to their week 2 matchup. And I understand that the media can be kind of harsh with Tua at times, but I really do think he's losing sight, as it seems that his whole tenure with Miami has been disappointing. And it's definitely looking like the Dolphins made a mistake drafting him in 2020. At the 5th pick overall, there was Justin Herbert on the board, and even Jalen Hurts, who sunk to the 2nd round, as each of them have proven to have better careers compared to Tua since entering the league 5 years ago. Tua has proven that he isn't durable, and he's one serious head injury away from calling it a career. As even when Tua has been on the field, what has he done to show for it? He's had 1 playoff appearance so far in his career and hasn't really done much, despite the roster having a lot of turnover to benefit his development. And even bringing in Mike McDaniel 3 years ago was for him and his development, as he didn't get along with Brian Flores to start his career. We also saw Tyreek Hill show massive frustration on the sideline, and it's been evident that Tyreek is no longer happy in Miami. Mind you, it's been a full calendar year since his last reception of over 30 yards, and that's wild to me because he's one of the best deep threats in the NFL. I wouldn't be surprised that the situation continues to boil and the vibes continuously get more toxic with the Miami Dolphins to the point where there are many moves to be made at the trade deadline, and that could start with Tyreek being traded back to Kansas City, as it seems that the Chiefs are razor thin at wide receiver due to injuries and suspensions. I like Mike McDaniel, I really do, but to be honest, his quirks and jokes have gotten stale at this point. Unless he can turn around this season and prove that he can find a way to get the Dolphins on a more physical brand of football and also find a way to reinvent this offense, I don't think he can save his job, because right now the Dolphins look soft and have no identity. Additionally, if Tua's struggles continue throughout this season, whether it's health or performance, the Dolphins might be forced to make a tough decision this offseason as they appear amidst of a massive implosion. In the latest edition of Ravens Bills, Sunday night was absolutely pure cinema. Two MVP dual threat quarterbacks going head to head in a playoff-like atmosphere, as this game had every twist and turn imaginable. The Buffalo Bills rally from a 15-point fourth quarter deficit with under 4 minutes remaining to steal a win on the first Sunday night game of the season. Josh Allen went God mode, putting his team on his back after trailing 40-25 thanks to a Derrick Henry long touchdown run. The Bills defense provided little to no resistance against Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, but got the breakthrough that they desperately needed when Ed Oliver was able to force a fumble on Derrick Henry with 3 minutes left in the game. Now, Derrick Henry did have a stellar night. He had over 170 yards rushing with 2 long touchdown runs, but clearly the play that turned the game upside down was his fumble, and the Bills immediately cashed in to cut the deficit to 2 points. But they failed to make the 2-point conversion on a night where they struggled to even get any type of momentum with 2-point conversions. They missed 3 total 2-point conversions on Sunday night. The Ravens got the ball back with a chance to end the game with a single first down. However, Buffalo's defense was able to get one more stop and give their superstar quarterback another crack at winning the game. Now, at this point, the Bills' offense is humming. They've scored 3 touchdowns already, and Baltimore's defense is gassed. Josh leads a game-winning drive connecting with Josh Palmer and later Keon Coleman, who each got past Jair Alexander both times, as this set up Matt Prater's game-winning field goal as the Bills steal a 41-40 victory to kick off the final season at Highmark Stadium. Takeaways from this epic game is that you can never count out Josh Allen. The Bills were left for dead after a demoralizing drive where Lamar is able to slither out of a sack at the 10-yard line and Houdini himself all the way to midfield. Within a few plays, Derrick Henry takes it all the way for a touchdown to make it 40-25. And despite having little push up front, little to no resistance defensively, and multiple failed 2-point conversions, Josh hung tough, was able to carve up this loaded Ravens defense to score 3 touchdowns and the game-winning field goal to win it. Matt Prater, who kicked the game-winning field goal, flew in on a red-eye on Friday evening, as he's been a free agent all summer long, and thanks to the injury to Tyler Bass, Matt Prater got a chance to kick a game-winning field goal. For the Ravens, this is yet another frustrating loss. I said that this is a team that has all the talent and was a superior team for 3.5 quarters, but once again, they blow another lead. The more you think about the Ravens and blowing big leads, the uglier it gets for Ravens fans. Under John Harbaugh, the Ravens have blown 17 double-digit leads, and there has been so many, especially in the last 3 seasons, that have cost the Ravens playoff berths, playoff seeding, or even home field advantage. New year, same Ravens who make self-inflicted mistakes. We always ask, can the Ravens get it done, and can they finish strong? For 3 quarters, sometimes they look like the best team in football. But when it comes down to the fourth quarter and when it comes time to make a play to close the door on a team that's coming back from down big, they failed to do so. Once again, it's penalties, and they had 7 in this game that resulted in over 50 yards, and that does add up in a 1-point game. They also had the Tyler Loop missed extra point that ended up coming back to haunt them at a point where, yes, you score 40 points, you should win that ball game. But given how the defense was looking in the second half and the pace of the game, that extra point on paper at least does somewhat make up the difference. And instead of the Bills going for the win, they would be forced to go for the tie with seconds remaining in the game. The other aspect is in the fourth quarter, the Ravens' offense completely dried up. After Derrick Henry's long touchdown run, it seemed that the Ravens were on their way to victory, but their offense completely dried up, where their last 3 possessions ended up in 2 punts and that fumble by Derrick Henry. And Derrick Henry had a fantastic game. Yes, he ran up and down the field. He ran over the Bills routinely, drive after drive, for long touchdown runs on 2 different occasions. But Ed Oliver came up with a play that flipped the game on his head. And mind you, Ed Oliver had a fantastic night where he had 3 tackles for loss, a sack on Lamar Jackson in a pivotal sequence of the game, and like I said, the forced fumble that changed momentum back to the Bills' way. Another point is the final possession. The Ravens had a 3rd and 10, and then a 7-yard completion to DeAndre Hopkins sets up a 4th and 3. Why give it back to Josh Allen when he has been carving up your defense for 3 scores heading into that final possession? Knowing that you only can defend maybe 30 to 40 yards to get into field goal range, I take my chances and trust Lamar Jackson, your 2-time MVP, Derrick Henry, who is a former 2,000-yard rusher, who's had a lot of success in this game against this particular defense. You have DeAndre Hopkins, who's making one-handed grabs. You have Zay Flowers, who is a weapon at any point where he touches the ball. And you have Mark Andrews. So there were plenty of options there for a 4th down play. And even if you don't convert and you give it back to the Bills in field goal range, you have 3 timeouts. Maybe you can stop them, and then you have a chance for one last gasp attempt to tie up or win this game. Finally, it's probably going to get lost in it, but the tackle on Keon Coleman by Jair Alexander. It's one thing to allow 2 long completions to get into field goal range, and it's clearly showing that Jair Alexander might be washed, but Jair made a boneheaded play to tackle Keon Coleman when he should have just let Keon score, and then the Ravens would have had maybe about 40 seconds left on the clock to get one more crack at it to score a touchdown to win the game. But instead, he tackles him at the 9-yard line. Josh Allen and the Bills basically run down the clock, and Matt Prater kicks the game-winning field goal to steal this win. We've seen too often that the Ravens get up big and they blow these big leads or make some critical mistake that they cannot afford to do so at that particular time. And until proven otherwise, we cannot trust these Ravens to get it done when it matters the most. Thanks for everyone tuning into this week's episode. Remember, to help this channel grow, reach a broader audience, we're gonna need your help. Drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. If you want to get clips from this week's episode, we got that for you here on YouTube in our various playlists, as well as on TikTok. If you want to enjoy Spectator Sports from an audio-only perspective, we got that for you on Spotify. Shout out to Joey for editing this podcast, and I'll catch you all on the next one. Take care, everybody.